afternoon. Missouri Humanities Council, one of our very strong Bicentennial Alliance partners, has teamed up with KCUR to produce a wonderful new broadcast coming up called Hungry for Missouri. It is co-hosted by Jenny Vergara for Feast Magazine, contributing editor for Kansas City, and Natasha Bailey, a chef, cheesemaker, and home gardener. And then with us to talk about it is Jenny, who is here with us today, along with Lisa Carrico, who is the Director of Family and Veterans Programs with Missouri Humanities Council. Welcome, Lisa and Jenna.
Thank you so much for having us today. My name is Lisa Carrico. I'm the Director of Family and Veteran Programs with the Missouri Humanities, and our mission is to... Let's try that again. I've been behind a Zoom camera for quite some time. Hello and welcome everyone. Thanks for having us. My name is Lisa Carrico and I'm the Director of Family and Veteran Programs for the Missouri Humanities Council. And our mission is dedicated to enriching lives and strengthening communities by connecting Missourians with the people, places, and ideas that shape our society.
And I'm Jenny Vergara. I'm the contributing editor for Feast Magazine in Kansas City, and I also have an underground supper club called the Test Kitchen that I run in Kansas City. And now I can add podcaster to my list as well, thanks to the Missouri Humanities Council. But before we talk about Hungry for Mo, we should really talk about food, right?
I agree with that. So we want you to take a moment to think about this question. When you hear the word food, what images and or feelings come up for you? If you want to raise your hand, maybe we can take a couple words for you. So what feelings come up for you when you think of food?
We have someone with a mic too who can come mic you up.
I was just pointing to the person with the microphone, but I'll say family.
Okay.
Family, very good. It's a good one to start, folks.
Nutritious comfort.
Oh, I like that.
Mm-hmm. Very good.
Just happiness. I like to make dinner for my family.
Right,
I
right.
feel like there's a lot happening there. You're sharing, you're making for others.
I think of birthdays and celebrations and special dinners, a family getting together and celebrating together.
I like that. Food is very ceremonial.
Mm-hmm.
Anyone else? Okay, so here's the words that we came up with. The human relationship with food is truly unique. From our ancestors first cooking food to today where we're changing food on a molecular level. Food is not only a basic need, but it's the root of our human existence. Food provides nourishment for our bodies, enrichment for our minds. Compared to the rest of the animal kingdom, food is unique in that it brings up emotional feelings for us. Food has the power to evoke memories and stories. Food is a connector. It connects us to each other, to our past, to our identities, and to the larger world around us. Coming together and sharing a meal is the most communal and universal way to connect. And even just talking about food has brought people together.
That's right.
So I'm going to sidestep for just a moment. In about 2019, our executive director walked into our office one day and says to the staff, "Hey, I had a dream about you, about me." And in that dream, I came to Steve and I talked about how we should do programming around food. Well, as the resident foodie on staff, I had actually brought this idea of culinary humanities up before. And so while we still give Steve credit for the programming around this, we wanted to get together and determine that intersection between food and humanities, and more specifically, examine the role of culinary heritage and connection right here in Missouri. And so out of this came a partnership with KCUR and the Hungry for Mo podcast. So the podcast is co-hosted by Natasha Bailey. She's a chef, cheesemaker, and gardener, and Jenny, who introduced herself earlier, a foodie and a freelance writer. And the show explores Missouri's culinary food history and celebrates how local cuisine connects us as a community and shapes our region's identity. And each episode dives deep, taking the listener on a food journey that highlights Missouri cuisine, including interviews with food inventors, historical events, and unique circumstances or family recipes that went into some of our state's most iconic dishes. So on the screen here, we have 6 episodes. And our first one drops on August 10th, so next week. We're super excited. And today you get to have a first-hand experience, hearing some audio excerpts and getting to listen to some answers from Jenny about the making of the podcast. But before we talk to Jenny, we're going to go ahead and play the trailer for you.
Okay, do you want to start or do you want me to start?
You can start.
You're a wimp.
I am. I'm like,
From KCUR Studios in Kansas City and the Missouri Humanities Council, this is Hungry for Mo, a podcast about the stories behind the iconic foods that shape our region. I'm Jenny Vergara, a freelance writer and the founder of the Test Kitchen, an underground supper club in Kansas City.
and I'm Natasha Bailey, a chef, cheese enthusiast, and home gardener.
This is going to be our first season of Hungry for Mo, a new podcast that's going to cover kind of the food that Missouri is known for, and we're going to cover the entire state in this podcast. Are you excited?
I'm excited. We're going to talk about George Washington Carver, and you're going to think that we're talking about peanuts for a while, but we're really not.
Carver is so underrated, and of course I was one of like all those little school children who knew about, George Washington Carver invented peanut butter.
We're going to take a trip to a little German town and learn how it saved the whole wine industry.
People were trying all sorts of crazy stuff, mustard gas, flooding the vines, burning the vines, hoping things get better.
What else do we do?
Oh my gosh. So let me tell you what I have for you. It is basically going to be, it's going to blow your mind. We have a crazy sandwich with a crazy name that has nothing to do with the state of Missouri. But it has this amazing rich history.
I always say that food brings us all together, and it's just one of those things where now you're calling a St. Paul sandwich an American thing, because guess what? It is. It doesn't matter if it was made by an Asian gentleman. It's an American thing.
And then, of course, we're going to go to a more traditional dish that we see quite a bit across the state.
You would be hard-pressed to find any Chinese restaurant in Springfield that did not have cashew chicken on their menu.
I can tell you that we are doing a deep dive, kind of looking at barbecue across the state and honing in basically on the differences and similarities between Kansas City style barbecue and St. Louis style barbecue.
Snoot is like crack, okay? Once you get into that snoot, you just, oh my God, you gotta have it.
One of the things that really irks me is that burnt ends have been claimed by Texans, and it's clearly from Kansas City.
Have you been surprised by anything you've learned about Missouri food just in general, based on kind of the knowledge where you started?
One thing that I've learned is that in a lot of these stories, Missourians like to help each other. And sometimes it just takes one person working on an idea to make a huge impact on our whole state.
And, it's one of those things where I don't know that we always look in our own backyard for inspiration, and that's what this podcast is going to be about. Those dishes that Missouri is known for that we can take inspiration from.
And this podcast is going to be celebrating the Missouri Bicentennial that is approaching this summer.
A major Missouri milestone.
I would encourage people to get in the car and take a road trip and visit Missouri. Go to those small towns, see the history of where we live.
The Show Me State.
I think sometimes we forget as Missourians to highlight how long we've been being innovative.
It would have never been created if we were never here.
That to me says so much about Missouri.
We are hungry for Mo.
Hungry for Mo.
So subscribe now wherever you get your podcasts.
I'm so excited.
I am too. Listening to that makes me excited all over again.
So Jenny, before we dive in, how did you find yourself writing about food?
So I've been covering the Kansas City food scene for probably about 10 years. My background and my degree was in corporate marketing and journalism. I never thought I'd write a single word in my life with regards to my degree, so I went straight into kind of corporate marketing, working for some bigger corporations over the last, I had a career of about 10 years, and then the last job I had actually corporately was with a restaurant group. I was the marketing director for Zio's Italian Kitchen, which had a few locations in Kansas City at the time. And I was there for about 5 years, and that was really where food and marketing crossed for me. And at that moment, I realized something in this industry I want to write about, I want to comment on, I want to be a part of. And I was just learning to cook myself, so I think that had something to do with it. I was starting to take an interest in learning how to make these dishes. So cooking and kind of where my job took me. But eventually I decided I had my first kid and I thought, that's it. I want to figure out what I can do in food. And I just started out food blogging basically and kind of developed my food career basically from a food blog that I started. So.
And now here you are podcasting.
Right, right. And I do have radio experience, I should say. Sorry, I'm sounding a little hot there. Maybe it's just get it in my pocket just right. There we go. So there's a food critic show in Kansas City on KCUR that basically was kind of a bi-weekly show that talked about like the restaurants and the dishes that were happening kind of in Kansas City. And I was considered one of the food critics on that show for probably about 5 or 6 years. So I had this kind of love, I had developed this love of radio. So it wasn't a huge leap for me when they came to me and said, do you want to do this podcast about the historic dishes in Missouri? I was like, of course I do. I've been put me in coach. I've been waiting for this moment, right? So yeah.
Great. So what intrigued you most about doing Hungry for Mo?
Well, because of my radio experience, podcasting is something that I had been thinking about, kind of a next step for something else I could do. I had done some voiceover work years and years ago and always been told that I had a pretty good voice for radio, more probably like a face for radio, as they like to put it in the industry. But yeah, and so really it was one of those things that I thought I would love to learn how to put a podcast together from start to finish. And that was the experience that KCUR allowed me to do while really allowing me to dig deep and do this research about these different dishes in the state of Missouri in a way that I hadn't been before. And my depth of knowledge on these dishes, it has just grown tremendously and made me appreciate brand new things about writing about food.
That's awesome.
Yep.
So it's 6 episodes, and you are doing the podcast with Natasha.
Right.
Did you and Natasha know each other before doing the podcast?
We did actually know each other before, and KCUR came to me and said, if you could do this podcast with anybody, who would it be? And I thought, I just would love to do something with Natasha. She and I had met at a charity event years before. We had worked a table kind of together and had about 4 hours during this kind of charity work that we had a chance to get to know each other, and I just loved her. She had this warmth and earth motherness to her that I thought would really translate well. And I wanted to hear her stories too. We hadn't had she has a lot of kids. In fact, the reason she's not here today with us, and she would have been, is she just gave birth to a little baby girl. So she's at home. In fact, she texted me on the way over here, "You're gonna kill it, good luck." So Natasha was just kind of a natural choice for me, and I was so grateful when she agreed to do it, because she really doesn't have kind of the same food background I do. She's more on the farming side and the restaurant side, and I'm kind of more on the food journalism side. So I think we were a good complement for each other. And then we had this extreme support of the entire team at KCUR. We had 2 excellent producers that we kind of split up and worked with. So.
Yeah,
lots of good people.
So do you want to explain to the audience kind of what the format of the podcast is?
Sure. So we had to make these decisions right at the very beginning, like what style of podcast was this going to be? Was it just going to be a straight up interview, or we were going to try to bring in sound? And the truth of the matter is we started doing this in the middle of the pandemic. So we knew we weren't going to be able to get out into the restaurants and actually get some of that live footage or that sound of being in a restaurant incorporated into it. So we decided basically to divide and conquer. With 6 episodes, once we had our topics down, we pretty much just split in half. So Natasha will actually be your main host for 3 episodes, and I will be your main host for 3 episodes. But you'll hear us conversing throughout the entire podcast together. So both of our voices are on every single episode, but you'll find that one of us is kind of the driving force through the podcast, where the other is just more of a commentator. So that kind of helped us, I did 3 and she did 3, and then we kind of came together and commented on each other. So it was great. It was a great way to work.
That's awesome. I love the exchange of the 2 of you talking, and then with the interviews with the special guest, it's really great.
Yep.
So for the first episode, you tackled barbecue in Missouri. Raise your hand if you are into barbecue. I imagine everyone's going to raise their hand. Jenny and I also decided to wear our finest clothing today in the form of barbecue shirts, representative of our sides of the state. So I'm wearing Sugar Fire that started in St. Louis and has greatly expanded through the state and out of state, actually. And do you want to talk about the shirt you're wearing?
Yeah, so I'm wearing the infamous Ted Lasso barbecue mashup shirt for anybody who's a fan of Ted Lasso, which I highly recommend. I'm a giant fan. But this is actually a mashup of Joe's, Arthur Bryant's, Gates, and Jack Stack. So they just kind of did an homage to all of those. And this is actually a t-shirt that he wears kind of on the show that you can get now in Kansas City. So.
And the shirt that I borrowed is from my friend Eric, if he's watching out there, and he worked in this shirt, so I feel like it's got a lot of love.
There you go. There you go.
So before asking you some questions about the episode, I thought it might be fun to play the opening scene.
Yeah. So if someone were to say to you, Natasha, where's the best place to eat barbecue in Kansas City? How do you answer that question? Because we all get it, right? It is the eternal question that anybody that lives in Kansas City gets constantly from anybody who's visiting.
I separate it by meat. Like I like to follow up with what are you wanting to eat?
Yes,
because
that is the correct
until I know
question.
that, I don't really know where to send you.
I think it's one of those things where we have to break it down by meat.
Yes.
And then maybe even sauce.
Yes.
Like sauce is kind of specific in Kansas City too. Do you have a favorite sauce?
Gates. I love Gates barbecue sauce.
Okay.
They're probably number 1.
Got it. And just the original.
The original.
Yeah.
Yeah. So good.
Yeah. Okay, so do you barbecue at home?
All the time.
You do?
Yes.
I'm so impressed already. I don't do any barbecue at home. Like to me, barbecue is kind of the sanctuary. You go out for barbecue. It's one of those things like fried chicken. It's such a mess to make at home, and it takes so long that you kind of go out for it. So tell me what it is that you like to barbecue at home. Like what's the go-to?
Personally, I love ribs. I like to do it on the grill, and then I will kind of cook them really low and slow in the oven. So you get that like 3 a.m. They're done, and you're like eating them in bed, and then you fall right back to sleep, and it's the best sleep of your life.
Do we call that barbecuing if it doesn't ever hit a smoker?
Ooh, I don't know.
And here, my friends, is how easy it is to stumble into one of the biggest debates in the world of barbecue. What is the definition of barbecue? And how is it different in St. Louis than it is in Kansas City?
I love this opening. You all bring up so many great questions about barbecue, and the topic of best barbecue in Kansas City or Missouri is a wildly popular question and one that's often contested. Barbecue is such an iconic food for our state, and it's talked about often. So how did you all approach such a huge topic?
Barbecue, we knew we had picked barbecue to be kind of the first episode because it is the dish that just we could find literally in every corner of our state. But it has so much rich history, and there's so many people that we could have talked about and places. I mean, Kansas City alone has 120 barbecue restaurants, and St. Louis, I'm sure, has, almost as many. And we were trying to say, is it, Kansas City, Missouri, and Middle State? Is it just Kansas City and Missouri? Is it the people that make the stuff? Is it the dishes that are more popular? So I think we started by narrowing it down and saying, Kansas City and St. Louis are on opposite sides of the state line. That would be a great way to kind of cover the state in general, because most barbecue places in the middle tend to do kind of one style or another, or maybe a mashup of both. So we knew we were going to do kind of a Kansas City, St. Louis and focus there. And then we decided that it was probably the dishes, really, the iconic classic dishes that each of these cities can kind of hang their hat on being able to do. So that was pretty much how we did it. Broke it up into dishes.
And when you broke it up into dishes, you ended up interviewing different chefs. Is that how you guys approached that?
So we did kind of two different things. We knew that we wanted like that gravelly, kind of crusty barbecue guy. Like we needed that voice in the podcast, because that's what you find when you go to kind of all the classic barbecue restaurants, is that, you know, kind of iconic pitmaster that's, you know, has been working for, you know, many years on his art form, if you will. So we wanted that voice, and we knew that we needed an expert, some sort of historian or something who could give us context to barbecue and what the history of barbecue in the state was. So we went to Adrian Miller, who just wrote a book called Black Smoke. And he also happens to be a Kansas City barbecue judge for the American Royal. So we knew he had enough credentials kind of within the state that he could really represent the historic side of things. And then we went to Smokey O's. So because we kind of picked Adrian and he had the Kansas City tie to the American Royal, we decided to get our gravelly barbecue expert on the opposite side of the state line. So we went to Smokey O's in St. Louis and talked to Erlene and Otis, who have owned Smokey Joe's for many years. And so that's kind of how we decided what the additional voices and experts would be in the podcast.
As a food writer, as a foodie, what do you feel like you learned about barbecue in the state of Missouri? What was your takeaway?
So I should confess right now that I originally hail from Oklahoma, but I have been in Kansas City for 30 years. So I don't know at what point you get your pin, but I feel like maybe after 30 years I can kind of say I'm from Kansas City for sure. So, you know, for me it was really about, say your question again.
So as a food writer, food person,
yes.
What do you feel like you learned about Missouri barbecue? What's
Thank you.
something unique?
So being in Kansas City and having been to St. Louis, certainly, and other places around the state and had barbecue, being from Kansas City means you're just inundated constantly all the time with competitive barbecue and talk about how to do Kansas City style barbecue and what's the equipment you use and how do you prepare it and what is classically looked for in competition style barbecue. It's a constant refrain. Barbecue is not necessarily, I mean, it's certainly something that we enjoy and do, but there's this layer of competition to it that made it really intimidating for me as a food writer. And for many years, I kept turning down projects that had me writing about barbecue in Kansas City because I just felt like I wasn't an expert in it. It was a massive, you know, you had to know all the rules to the American Royal before you could sit down and be a voice on the barbecue scene. And we have people that do nothing but write about barbecue in Kansas City. So I just felt like that was something that was really intimidating. So for me to be able to take a step back and really dive deep on what Kansas City barbecue meant, and then also to go across the state and compare to how they did it in St. Louis. I mean, unfortunately or fortunately, either way, we're a little braggadocious in Kansas City because we actually have an accredited style of barbecue. And St. Louis obviously has not really pursued that title for themselves, although they certainly have a barbecue scene, as we found out. So for me, it was getting the blinder of being from Kansas City in the kind of competitive world and pulling out of that and seeing the joy of barbecue in other parts of the state.
I like that.
Yeah.
So the next episode, the second episode that you did, covers some iconic Chinese dishes for Missouri palate. So what are those two dishes?
So we talked about the St. Paul sandwich and Springfield style chicken. So those were kind of the two places. Were we going to play the clips on these? Perfect. Okay, gotcha. So yeah, those two dishes, it was one of those things where we sat down and we thought, we made a list of all the things that the state of Missouri can claim they invented, you know, claim they created. And this sandwich, the St. Paul sandwich, is out of St. Louis, and obviously Springfield fried chicken, or cashew chicken, came out of Springfield. So we felt like that was kind of a mid-state St. Louis tie that we could pull together. But these were both dishes that were created for the Missouri palate by Chinese Americans who were trying to figure out how to make a living. So that kind of narrowed it down really quick. We were like, we can take credit for these two things, and here's the people that kind of created them for us. So
okay. Let's listen in. We're going to listen to the open scene.
So in St. Louis, Missouri, there's the sandwich. It's got kind of a cult following. And if you're from St. Louis, you probably already definitely know what I'm talking about. It's called the St. Paul sandwich. And it's kind of reminiscent of egg foo young, the popular Chinese American dish. Basically, an egg foo young patty is fried and cooked in oil until it's golden brown on the outside and soft and pillowy on the inside. And then it's placed between two pieces of bread. Okay, so tell me exactly what is on the St. Paul sandwich. So it's just the egg foo young patty, and then is it white bread? Always white bread?
Yeah, I mean, it's the whitest white bread you can get, whether it's Wonder Bread or Bunny Bread or...
Qui Tran from Miley in St. Louis makes this on a regular basis. And soft, right? Not toasted, not just soft.
Soft, like not toasted, soft.
It's then slathered with mayo, topped with lettuce, tomato, and maybe a little dill pickle. And this, my friends, is where the sandwich throws me for a loop. Toasted white bread I could get with, but soft, squishy white bread with a steaming hot omelet in between sounds like a recipe for a soggy mess. And yet somehow it works, and has for many decades now.
You know, I've seen people add cheese. So I've seen people add a slice of cheese on top, you know, and a Kraft Singles piece of cheese.
Nice. Of course it's a Kraft single.
That's the only high-end thing to it was Kraft Singles.
So there is no such thing as like a $10 St. Paul sandwich that's been gourmeted up.
I mean, I can definitely make it. You know, we can say truffles on it. We can get the Iberico ham.
Is there a certain time of day or day part that you're eating a St. Paul sandwich? So is it a breakfast, lunch, dinner, late night? When do you eat a St. Paul in St. Louis?
Yes.
The short answer is yes, anytime.
Anytime.
I love this clip, and I am somebody as a child. There was a Chinese restaurant down the street from us, and my dad would pick us up St. Paul sandwiches. So how many people in the audience have had a St. Paul sandwich? Okay.
No takers. No takers, okay. Okay, all right. Got it.
Well, you'll have to road trip over.
Yeah.
Mikey is an amazing restaurant, so it's probably a good place to get that. So, Jenny, for this episode, why do you think it's so important to highlight these dishes, and what do you think we can learn about ourselves looking at these two Chinese dishes?
You know, it's interesting because there's been a lot of talk in the last probably 5 to 10 years in food journalism, just in general, and the word is authentic, you know, with the tall A, and what is considered authentic. And it's something that we struggle with, and honestly, I think the people who make the food for us struggle with it just as much as perhaps we do. So we've tried really hard in food journalism to kind of get away from using the word authentic. And this is a great example of, you know, both of these dishes are American as they come. I mean, created and invented by Chinese American people who really just wanted to figure out how they could survive, you know, how they could make their businesses go. What was going to be a dish that took some inspiration from what Americans already seem to love and enjoy in the state of Missouri, and kind of combined it with what dishes that they knew how to cook. And somewhere in that innovation is really where you know, you have this mashup of cultures and cuisines kind of happening. It is the single point. You know, every time you go into a Chinese restaurant, you know, you want to order something other than sweet and sour chicken, right? I mean, that's kind of the classic American Chinese dish. And then you look at this dish and you think, how is this possibly Chinese? Well, how could it not be? It was created by a man of Chinese descent who was just literally simply trying to survive. And so you see where immigrants that come to this country aren't precious. They don't use the big A authenticity word like we do as, you know, from the white lens looking into the immigrant culture. You know, they just want to survive. They want to feed their families. They want to have a successful business. And they're willing to do whatever it takes to cater to that. And they'll eat authentic Chinese, if you will, with the big A at home, in their own homes. But when they go out to eat, it's a matter of survival, and they want to find something that crosses those borders, crosses, you know, what we perhaps might be looking for in terms of the kind of comfort food that we love, and they want to mix it with what they consider to be their comfort food. So I love the idea of cultures kind of coming together and mashing together to create dishes that are craveable and understandable and historic. I mean, both of these dishes have been around for 50 to 60 years, I think, in both cases, both Springfield cashew chicken and the St. Paul sandwich. But I'm going to have to give the St. Paul another shot the next time I'm in St. Louis. I'll have to say that. So I sound a bit skeptical at the beginning of this only because I just can't get my head around mayonnaise and soft white bread with a hot patty in the middle. But I'm not a hater. I will definitely try.
When you're in St. Louis, let me know.
Okay.
We're going to eat
Okay.
sandwiches
Done.
together.
Done.
I'll be reminiscing.
Yes.
You may be
Yes.
making interesting faces.
No. I'm down. I'm down to try.
So for the third episode, you discovered a company headquartered in Missouri who invented something that remains a comforting presence in American kitchens. It's a throwback to the 70s and a Super Bowl necessity. For me, this household item brings back memories of my mom's homemade chicken and dumplings, where she rolled out the dough and then cooked it in this. Can anybody guess what this household item is? You can just yell it out, that's fine. Yes, and if you were looking at the episodes, it was up there, so you didn't have a cheat. So Jenny, who were your crock pot experts that you went to for more information, and do you want to tell them about who this company is?
Sure, you bet. So this was like one of those really brilliant surprises that we kind of came across as we were doing the research for this podcast. And we were looking at it from the standpoint of we want some sort of like kitchen gadget implement something that was created in the state of Missouri. Surely there was an innovation that we created. And when we stumbled across the fact that the rival corporation in Kansas City, Missouri, actually was the people that took this. So Crock-Pot's original iteration was called the Naxon Beanery, and it was basically just a crock that kept your beans warm. And it was, it wasn't a big seller, it wasn't a huge success, and the rival corporation in Kansas City actually bought a smaller company that happened to have this Naxon Beanery on their list. And they didn't think too much of that. They were actually interested in some of the other products that they were going to inherit with this kind of takeover. So the Naxon Beanery kind of sat around for a while, and then eventually the rival corporation had an entire department full of home ec ladies, basically. There was an all-female staff. And somebody brought in the Naxon Beanery and said, listen, we've got to figure out how to remarket this, or what we can do with this other than just sell beans. And so the ladies that were in that home ec kitchen sat down and started recipe testing everything. Desserts, savory dishes, appetizers, soup, stews, like everything they could think of. And basically came back to rival and said, this product could be bigger than anything we've ever seen. We just need to repackage it, and we think we should call it the Crock-Pot. So Rival Corporation is long gone at this point. The Crock-Pot still lives on just under its own brand name, Crock-Pot, and I think Sunbeam owns it now. And so we still have Crock-Pot, but the thing is that Crock-Pot, in order to get the voice right, we knew we needed somebody inside a Rival Corporation. And it just so happens that I'm the vice president of the La Dame d'Escoffier group in Kansas City, and two of our members were two of the home economics ladies that were in the rival kitchen, and I had no idea. I was friends with these ladies, I had no idea, and I just happened to be talking to somebody about the podcast and saying, I wish we could find somebody, we've been looking, but these rival folks, they've scattered to the wind, and these two gals came up and said, we used to work at Rival. In fact, we were in the kitchen recipe developing when that thing was launched, so we got amazing voices on tape for this. I'm so excited for everybody to hear these ladies.
Sadly, we do not have a clip from that,
I know.
Tune in.
We're finishing up. It's the very last one that we're working on right now. But yeah, you'll have to stay tuned because the history of the Crock-Pot's amazing.
So what were the things that you found most fascinating about the Crock-Pot?
So I myself, of course, most of us have at least one Crock-Pot, right, in the cupboard somewhere. I know I do. I probably have two, like kind of a bigger one maybe for like cheese dip, Super Bowl kind of stuff, and maybe a smaller one for just kind of rainy days when I need comforting soup or something to come home to. But Crock-Pot was one of those things where it really was like right place, right time. It was an implement that was marketed basically to cook all day while the cook's away was the tagline, right? So this is a freedom moment for women, kind of untethering themselves from the kitchen and being able for the first time maybe to work outside the home. And so this allowed them to still have a warm meal when their family came home. And then, through time, obviously, as families got busier and the kid has basketball practice, he can come home right after school and he can dip in and have something out of the crock pot for his dinner before he goes off to practice. Dad may be working late. He might come in at a different time, and yet there's still a hot meal available in the crock pot. So there was kind of this freedom for women that came with this, which was a real revelation as we started to kind of dig into this episode. But the second thing that I thought as a cook myself that I really thought was fascinating was I have a crock pot that I can't leave on all day. It literally cooks my food in a matter of hours, maybe 2 hours max. So you have all these recipes that say cook for 4 hours or 6 hours until it's fork tender. I mean, mine was cooking it lightning fast. And these two ladies at Rival said, well, there's a difference between a slow cooker and a crock pot. So the original crock pots were slow cookers. They were meant to cook low and slow. And as fresher ingredients, more produce got into our diets. If you can imagine when the crock pot was launched, you couldn't buy chicken breasts at the grocery store. You had to buy a whole chicken and break it down. I mean, these are the innovations that have created this absolute necessity in being able to cook fast and not necessarily slow. Because if you start with, fresh vegetables and fresh herbs and some chicken breast, that doesn't need to cook for 4 hours till it falls off the bone. That'll cook real quick like that. So it was talking about the difference, and they actually suggested that everybody go out and go to your Goodwills and your thrift stores and scour for those avocado and Harvest Gold and bright red crock pots, because those crock pots are the only ones that are slow cookers. They don't make slow cookers anymore. So if you see one, call me, because I'm on the hunt right now. I'm on the hunt right now. I'm going to get one.
I like it. So what wowed you the most about working on Hungry for Mo?
Yeah, Hungry for Mo was extremely collaborative, and maybe it's just the function of me working as a freelancer. I mean, I work alone at my desk kind of all day writing about food, and over the last year, of course, as we were all kind of confined to our homes and trying to stay safe, it really was one of those things where you just felt very distant. I was starting to feel very disconnected from the food scene I was asked to write about. I was feeling disconnected from the people in the food scene that I loved, and I hated to see what was happening to them. And along came the opportunity to work on this podcast, and all of a sudden I had a bright spot in my week where I was doing a Zoom call and talking to Natasha and talking to the team at KCUR and getting my creative juices flowing in terms of like what the episodes could be about, what were the voices we could look for. So it came like right at the right time where I just needed something that connected me with people and food, kind of in a way that I didn't even maybe realize that I had lost or missed during the pandemic. And then the other thing I was really surprised about was when we needed an expert. I don't know what it is about Sunday morning. Do we have Sunday morning fans that love that kind of TV show? I love that show. I watch it every single Sunday. But I have to say, I would be sitting there and an expert would come on and talk about the very thing that I was needing an expert for. And so, for example, our Chinese episode that has our 2 Chinese dishes, Jennifer Lee is an incredible voice, and she just happened to be on Sunday morning talking about kind of Chinese food and where it fit in the diaspora of Jewish culture at Christmas Eve. And I literally wrote down her name, and I thought, wouldn't it be cool to get her voice? I bet she has some incredible things to say about kind of how immigrants were so innovative. Boy, you just pick up the phone, and she was like, sure, I'll do your podcast. Same thing with Adrian Miller. I mean, he is quite a big voice on not only the barbecue scene, but also just in general as a food historian and food writer. And I thought, we'll never get him to do this podcast. But my gosh, everybody we called, and I was, each of us were taking turns kind of reaching out to these experts. And I was making sure my plea was very, very succinct, but also hopefully something that they'd be interested in participating in. Like, we really need your voice because of this. And I've read this of yours, and I think you'd be the right voice for this. So I was surprised at kind of these big name experts who were willing to come on and talk to us. I kind of felt good, Do
you think that was kind of a byproduct of COVID where people wanted to talk more? And
that could totally be it. That really could totally be it. I mean, I think it's one of those things where we were all missing our family events, all those celebrations, right, that we talked about where we love to get together over food and make these dishes that we all know are so iconic. And we weren't able to really last year in the same way that we had before. So that could be absolutely part of it, is that everybody was kind of wanting to tell their story. I remember when, and oh, let's talk about that dish. You know, I had it as a child. My father used to take me to have the St. Paul sandwich. I mean, there's always these stories that tie us to food. So yeah, that could possibly be exactly why.
You also just might be convincing as well. And,
hopefully, if I'm good at my job at all, right? Please talk to me. I'm so interested in talking to you. Well, I've found that a dose of fangirl doesn't help at all. Like if you can kind of make, you know, if you can be a fan of the people that you're asking for an interview, it makes it easy. And I was big fans of both of these folks, so.
So Jenny and I did have lunch and we did have barbecue today. What was the name of the place we went to?
Como Smoke and Fire is where we went today for barbecue.
We thought that would be
right.
fitting with our
yes, our barbecue t-shirts on.
But I am a self-proclaimed foodie, and so it was really exciting for me to have Jenny be a part of this podcast because I've been reading her articles in Feast magazine. So thank you again for being a part of this. Before taking questions from the audience, we are celebrating the Missouri Bicentennial. So Jenny, in your opinion, what is the value of understanding Missouri's culinary food history?
You know, the thing about our culinary food history is that it starts and ends with the people in Missouri. And so one of the things that really shone bright as we worked through all 6 episodes was the impact of the immigrants and the people who actually landed here and settled here. You know, we had the influence. I mean, barbecue actually started as an American Indian kind of byproduct, and we talk about that actually in the barbecue episode. So we had kind of that base layer of kind of the American Indian influence that was already here. And then as immigrants started to come in, each culture was bringing different things to the party, different things to the mix, and creating kind of this, well, I'm looking at a quilt outside. I mean, that's the best way to say it, kind of quilting together what we would consider our culinary scene, right? So it's all the people who have come here and wanted to stay here and make a difference. You know, Missouri food, comfort food, didn't just kind of pop up out of nowhere. One of the questions actually that kind of ties back to this had to do with the crock pot ladies that I told you about. So Roxanne and Karen, and I was saying to them, you know, I was looking through all these crock pot recipe books, and I said, every single one of these recipes looks like a Midwestern favorite. Like, you know, when you think about like your classic crock pot dishes, it's kind of grandma's home cooking, and it's the flavors that you know from, you know, kind of a white diaspora childhood in the Midwest that's very comforting. And I said, why is that? And she said, because we were from Kansas City. We were from the Midwest. And we were the ones asked to write the recipes, right? So had the crock pot been invented, I don't know, in California, maybe there would have been a more interesting kind of mix of dishes. But I said, is that on purpose? Like, why is it, for me, crock pot recipes feel so Missouri to me, which is one of the things we were trying to get at. And I think that's a great way to kind of, you know, everywhere you go, you take with you your food history and your love of food. And everybody who tastes your food understands why you're doing that, and they remember it. And it's something that you carry with you in a smell that you smell or a flavor that you forget what it tastes like. And when you have it again, it is an instant memory back to people. And it really is the thing, I think, that bonds people. I mean, we can talk about all kinds of things that have really pulled the people in this country apart over the last year. But I'm telling you, food is the great equalizer. It is the one thing that brings everyone to the table, so.
And that's really the focus that we wanted to have with this podcast, is in a time where things have felt pretty separate, we wanted to bring people together over food. And I was going to ask the question, can food identify a region? I think your crockpot example is perfect. Mm-hmm. Something that's always cracked me up is we love bringing food together in the Midwest, and casseroles are such a thing. And I remember in college, I brought like a green bean casserole to the party. So Midwestern. And of course, one of the friends on the West Coast is like, what is with you people in the Midwest and these green bean casseroles? And I'm like, if you try it, you'll see. So I do feel like food can identify a region. So does anyone have a question for Jenny or for me, or a question about the podcast?
I actually have some comments. I'm from Southeast Missouri, which is 2.5 hours from Memphis, Tennessee, and 8 hours from Kansas City. We've had a barbecue place down there for over 60 years. It draws a huge following of people, and it's known for its dry rub ribs. So when I came up here and everything is so saucy and messy, I couldn't understand why barbecue wasn't what I grew up with. And there's a huge industry of hog farmers that grow pigs to be a certain size so that the ribs will be a certain size.
Right.
And the hickory wood has to be from a certain place so that you get the same kind of barbecue.
Right.
And Memphis, Tennessee is also a dry rib barbecue place. And you never even mentioned that.
Right, right. Well, you know, Memphis, so we talk about a little bit in the podcast how basically we had, Black people were getting freed and coming to other places. They were flowing out of the South with all of this barbecue culture and history with them. And they were going and landing in different places. And so they landed, most of the influence of barbecue that we can track back, at least in the state of Missouri, came from West Tennessee. And so we saw a little bit of that kind of happening. The original, I'll give the example in Kansas City because it's probably closer to what I know, but Henry Perry was an African-American man who came to Kansas City specifically. He was a riverboat captain who also knew how to cook. And he basically went on the streets, went down to the stockyards. We had a giant stockyards like most of the Midwestern cities did, and got the scraps of meat that he could, stood on a street corner and was really the first Kansas City barbecuer. And now has this incredible legacy where you can trace his kind of predecessors back to Arthur Bryant's and to Gates. But he had a very spicy, peppery sauce. In the original kind of descriptions, he even took out ads in the newspaper, if you can imagine, at the turn of the century, talking about, you know, he was the barbecue king of Kansas City. And it was a really harsh sauce. It was not at all like our sweet sauce. And that came out of kind of the African kind of home cooking that he was doing basically at home. And that was what he was used to. And the people in Kansas City thought it was super spicy. Like it was really a lot of chili peppers and it was kind of blowing their head off. And it wasn't until he started to kind of open up his own place and bring in some proteges who were like, maybe a little tomato sauce in this kind of peppery, spicy barbecue sauce. So dry rub ribs are Memphis all day long, I was gonna say. So if you're down by Memphis, I'm guessing that somebody loves Memphis, Tennessee barbecue, but I wouldn't really, it's not, doesn't, you know, dry rub ribs is not something that can be defined St. Louis or Kansas City. So it would be much more of a Memphis style.
I also want to say something about Instapots.
Yes.
You just need to talk a little bit about Instapots following crock pots.
Yes, and you're right. In fact, I believe the ladies, we're putting together kind of the crock pot episode right now. We got so much great knowledge and audio from these two ladies that we really want to do this episode justice. So we're taking a little bit more time, and it'll be one of the last ones that we release. But you should definitely listen to it. I believe they do end up talking about Instapots and how, you know, as slow cookers stopped being slow and we started to move into quicker cooking pots, the Instapot obviously came right on its heels. So I believe if they leave that audio in, there should be something about the...
Well, there's two women here in Columbia who have an Instagram have done several cookbooks on Instapots.
Okay.
So you could check them out. I can't remember who they are.
I will. Well, and if we have a second season, if you guys all watch and tell people to watch, right? So maybe we can move on and do some, dabble and do some other things.
And yes, Jenny, that's what I was going to ask you. I can't wait for the first one to drop and to listen to the series. That's 6. I'm going to want more. What's plans?
I think you're just going to have to wait and see. If you subscribe and make sure that the numbers are high, I think we can guarantee a second season.
It's just like everything else, the proof is in the pudding. So I hope that everybody listens to the podcast. It is one of those kind of looks at the state where, I have to tell you, I thought I knew quite a bit about food in Missouri, but I've learned a lot doing this podcast. So I'm really grateful for the opportunity. Yeah.
Yeah, and I do feel like just in 6 episodes, when we started this conversation between Missouri Humanities and KCUR, our heads were like exploding with ideas and how do we start this off? What angle are we taking? So it was really hard to narrow it down to the 6.
There's a million great dishes and ideas and things that we have invented here. We tried to stay really true to picking things that we could lay claim to, things that we were absolutely known for. So,
Do you have a favorite episode?
Do I personally have a favorite episode? Okay, I'm dying for the Crockpot episode. And it's not done yet, and I haven't heard any. So they don't know this. Don't tell KCUR this. But we all have access to the same Google Drive, and that's where we're working on scripts for each episode, obviously. And then also when they're sound mixing on the back, after we've recorded all these interviews, they do this sound mix and start to kind of piece the episode together and how they think it's going to go based on the script that we've written. And I'll go into the studio, I'll record my bit of the script, and then they'll kind of put it all together. They have a folder there that's secret that I'm not supposed to know about. And I click it and listen, just at each snippet as it's coming in and they're starting to develop it, just so I can kind of understand how the episode's coming together. And I love all of the episodes I got to work on. Natasha actually is the host for the other 3 episodes. You'll certainly hear my voice on it, but she's the one that kind of takes the leads on those. But Crockpot, I'm really looking forward to Crockpot. And maybe just because I haven't heard the whole thing all the way through. But it does feel like this has been, so when we started the podcast, Natasha was not pregnant. We're launching the podcast and Natasha's had a beautiful baby girl in the last 2 weeks. So that should tell you kind of the length of time. I mean, it's been well over a year that we've been kind of noodling and percolating on this. And it does feel a little bit like you're birthing a baby all of a sudden here at the Bicentennial. You know, it's like you're proud. You know, you've worked really hard on all of this. So I'm so grateful to be able to be here today to share it with all of you. And I hope you enjoy it.
Thank you so much, Jenny, for this conversation today and being a part of Hungry for Mo and for splitting some barbecue with me today. I don't know about you, but I'm oddly feeling hungry and very excited for this podcast to come out. So to listen, we did put the website up there for you. It's www.kcur.com/podcast, Hungry for Mo. We will also link this to the Missouri Humanities page and hopefully do some more like supplementary programming around this. It'll also be available on Spotify and Apple Podcasts, so make sure you subscribe. We would love to hear your thoughts on this program. We would really appreciate if you could take a few minutes. So we're going treeless by both of the exits. There's a picture frame with a QR code. If you just take your camera on your smartphone, it'll link you right up to an online where you get to push all the buttons and it'll go straight to data collection for me. And if there's a kind of a question about improvements for the program or things that you like that you learned, if there is something Missouri-based food-wise that you would love to hear an episode in the future about, feel free to put your suggestions in there as well. If you enjoyed this program and you would like to learn more about the Missouri Humanities, you can check us out on Facebook, on our website. We also have a membership program that has discounted tickets for special events, free books. It's easy, just click on our Become a Member. So thank you again, everybody, for joining us on this Saturday, and we hope that you enjoy the rest of the festival. And happy Bicentennial, Missouri.
Thank you.